Israel gradually reopens the al-Aqsa Mosque compound, closed for the first time in 48 years after a gun attack. But could heightened security further restrict access for Palestinians? And why does this holy site, revered by both Muslims and Jews, provoke such violence? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Rochelle Carey. The al-Aqsa Mosque compound is Islam's third holiest site. It's also Judaism's holiest place of worship. It's a place that perhaps also symbolizes aspects of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Two religions, one site, and a status quo. On Friday, 3 Israeli Palestinians and 2 Israeli police officers died in a gun battle at that compound. Israel immediately closed it down for prayers, the first time that's happened since 1969. The compound is being reopened to the public, but with new security apparatus, including metal detectors and additional cameras. Muslim religious authorities who administer the mosque are now refusing to pray there, objecting to the new Israeli measures. So let's take a look at the al-Aqsa Mosque compound. The site is home to 2 of the most important sites in Islam, the Dome of the Rock and the al-Aqsa Mosque, but it's also claimed by Jews for whom it's called Temple Mount. In 1967, Israel occupied East Jerusalem and later annexed the area in a decision that was not recognized by the United Nations. After a peace treaty in 1994, Israel accepted Jordan as the compound's custodian. But Jordan's stewardship actually dates back 70 years before that to an agreement between Palestinian leaders and the Jordanian king's great-grandfather. Under this current arrangement, Jews pray at the western wall of the compound and Muslims at the al-Aqsa Mosque. Non-Muslims are allowed to visit at certain hours, but not pray there. Palestinians face severe restrictions if they want to enter the al-Aqsa Mosque compound. And now new security measures will mean even more intensive searches irrespective of age and gender. Men under the age of 40 are at times told by Israeli forces they cannot enter the mosque for Friday prayers. Sometimes only children and women of all ages and men over 40 are allowed through the checkpoints. It is a long and stressful journey, especially if worshipers are coming from the occupied Palestinian territories. If coming from Gaza, it's almost impossible. For example, let's take a Palestinian traveling from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. A 19-kilometer journey can take more than an hour and a half. At the Al-Khalidiyah checkpoint, they can be delayed, stopped, and denied entry. If they make it to Jerusalem, there are various Israeli security points to pass through before they can enter the compound. Let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Tel Aviv, Gideon Levy, columnist of the Haaretz newspaper and author of The Punishment of Gaza. And Ramallah, Mustafa Barghouti, Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative. And in West Jerusalem, Mohammed Nusaba, senior member of the Aqsa Authorities and Islamic High Committee. Welcome to everybody. Gideon, I want to start with you. Do you think that Israel was justified in closing the mosque?
No, I think that Israel is doing some measures, but I think that even the current government in Israel, which is a nationalistic and a right-wing government, understands the sensitivity, and they are trying now their best to pull out, and to try to get back to the status quo, because we are dealing with such an explosive material that even the Israeli government understands it.
Mustafa, do you agree with that? Do you think that the Israeli government is using a measured approach, or what do you think about them closing down the mosque?
No, I think the Israeli government is using the incident to consolidate further its control in the area. And probably they have already prepared plans that they are trying to implement to change the nature of the situation in the Aqsa Mosque. By the way, status quo is not acceptable to us, because what is status quo? Status quo is a situation where 95% of Palestinians, including myself, are prohibited from entering Jerusalem, are prohibited from entering al-Aqsa Mosque. 95% of Palestinian Muslims and Christians are deprived from their right of free prayer, whether in al-Aqsa Mosque or in the Sepulchral Church, or anywhere in any other religious site. In a way, what we see today is a system of apartheid, a system of racial discrimination. And now Israel wants to use the most recent incident to enhance its control and to create much more obstacles for Palestinians. No country in the world has ever closed down a whole town because of an incident. Israel did not only close the Aqsa Mosque, which is something that never happened since 50 years, but it went further and more to close down practically the whole old city. And so many residents of the old city could not get back to home till today noon. This is unacceptable, and it's a behavior that reflects a very deep racist discrimination.
Okay, Mustafa, we're actually going to come back to some of the points that you brought up, specifically addressing what the status quo is. But before we do, Mohammed, I want to give you a chance to react as well to Israel's decision to close the mosque. Your thoughts on that?
Well, to start with, what the Israeli authorities are doing, closing the mosque, is, first of all, illegal and contrary to all human rights conditions. A holy place is a place that should be open to all those faithful who want to go and pray there. It's not going into a battle to be searched or searched by going through an electronic door. But to talk about the status quo, this status quo specifically, what has been mentioned, is not regarding all the problem, the Palestinian problem. It's regarding the status quo in the al-Aqsa Mosque. It's something that the authorities ought to be, should stick to. It was through the status quo that was originally in 1984 for all arrangements in this area. And everybody has been sticking to status quo in that area since then. In addition, the Jordan-Israeli agreement have mentioned this status quo to be strictly stuck to during the period of the agreement. So it is in violation of three things: the Israeli-Jordanian peace agreement, the violation of human rights, and thirdly, violation of the status quo.
Mohammed,
So
if I could,
the Israelis
if I could get in for just a moment, we're actually
Yes.
we're going to come back to that in just a moment. But you mentioned the metal detectors, and that's actually something that I wanted to direct to Gideon for a moment. Gideon, on the surface, it seems that metal detectors would simply be about safety, but do you think that is that a charged move, a complicated move, possibly a volatile move by the Israeli government to put metal detectors at a religious site like that?
First of all, let's remember that al-Aqsa is under the Israeli occupation like any other place in the occupied territories. And when I was speaking about the status quo, I was speaking about the status quo of occupation, which is illegal and criminal and not just, and everything you mentioned. And the security measures that Israel is trying to take are security measures against resistance to the occupation. And we know very well that resistance to the occupation will continue, because any occupation meets resistance, and no occupation in the world can overcome a resistance. And therefore, those measures, even though they are technical measures and maybe they are motivated by really some kind of motivation to avoid such incidents like the Friday's incident, by the end of the day, as long as al-Aqsa and Jerusalem, East Jerusalem and the West Bank and Gaza will continue to be under occupation, the resistance will continue and incidents like this will continue and no measures will prevent it. No measures in the world.
Mustafa, your thoughts or your reaction to this? How will the presence of metal detectors resonate with Palestinians?
Well, I totally agree that, of course, the main problem is occupation. And without ending the occupation and the system of apartheid that Palestinians are subjected to, there will be no calm. And of course, there will be no peace, and Palestinians will continue to suffer in a way that nobody ever has suffered in the same manner. Even people who are visiting us from South Africa say that what you have today under Israeli occupation is a much worse system of apartheid than what they had there. And that was a very bad situation anyhow. The metal detectors, in my opinion, is one way of Israel in making more obstacles to Palestinians from entering the mosque. Let's remember that Israel has violated so many agreements and arrangements and the status of Aqsa Mosque by allowing so many illegal Israeli settlers to enter the mosque. And in my opinion, Israel is using this new incident to create more obstacles for Palestinians and to change the situation so that Israeli illegal settlers would enter the mosque and probably start to pray there. In my opinion, the ultimate goal of Israel is to change the situation of al-Aqsa Mosque like they did in the Ibrahimi Mosque in Hebron, which happened after an Israeli terrorist called Goldstein committed a massacre against 29 Palestinian prayers who were praying. This is unacceptable. These Israeli measures are unacceptable. I cannot imagine how during Ramadan, for instance, the detectors would allow Palestinians to enter the mosque. The crowd will be so big and the lines will be so huge that it would be practically impossible for Palestinians to enter the mosque.
So
these measures, in my opinion, are only to create more obstacles for Palestinians.
Mohammed, do you think that even though the mosque has been reopened, it is slowly being reopened, do you still think the groundwork is there for this to become even more unstable, even more volatile?
It will be far worse. It will be far worse. It will never be stable if we lose control of the sovereignty and control of everything on the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This thing the Israelis attempted to do this sort of thing in 1990 after a massacre that took place at that time and was perpetrated by the Israeli forces. At that time, I remember that the Israeli police chief came and met with us. They requested that, or said they wanted to install electronic doors, as they have done today. And we told them then, as we repeated again now, we will not and will never accept electronic doors to be installed at the entrance to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's a holy, sovereign area controlled by the Arabs, the Palestinians, the Muslims, through the previous status quo and through agreements that have been connected with the Jordanian peace treaty. So this will not be accepted. It will not make the place more safe, because safe to whom?
Okay,
Israelis don't pray there. The Muslims go and pray there. So would it be put in order to make safety to the Palestinian prayers, worshippers over there? The whole thing doesn't make sense.
Okay, Mohammed, you mentioned the incident that happened back in 1990. And obviously, this is not the first time that tensions have flared at Al-Aqsa Mosque. Let's kind of recap some things that have happened over the past decades. In 1969, an Australian national tried to set fire to the mosque. Dennis Michael Rohan caused serious damage to the World Heritage Site's most important features, including a pulpit dating back to the 12th century. Then, in 1982, an Israeli soldier entered the mosque and killed 2 Palestinians after randomly shooting worshipers. Then in 1990, as Mohammed referenced, at least 20 Palestinians were killed and hundreds wounded in confrontations between Israeli security forces, Jewish hardliners, and Palestinian protesters. Then in 1996, 63 people were killed in days of protest over the opening of a tunnel by Israelis under the Western Wall. 4 years later, in 2000, former Israeli Prime Minister and then opposition leader Ariel Sharon visited the compound. His visit sparked what is known as the Second Intifada. And in May this year, hundreds of Israeli Jewish hardliners stormed al-Aqsa Mosque, sparking protests. That is quite a history. Gideon, how would you compare and contrast Israel's reaction now to what their reaction has traditionally been when these things have happened in the past?
First of all, closing the mosque is an extreme measure that Israel was always very careful not to do. And Israel feels today strong enough to do it. And you see also that the Arab and Muslim world was quite reluctant and was not very active in its protest. But by the end of the day, I repeat myself, even the right-wing Israeli government understands that we are dealing maybe with the most sensitive and explosive place in the world. And as long as Israel wants to maintain the occupation as it does, it will do anything possible to calm things down, because an explosion in al-Aqsa Mosque might bring the end of the occupation.
What about that, Mustafa? What about Gideon's point that perhaps it's in Israel's best interest not to tamp this up?
Well, I don't think that level of wisdom is always available in the minds of the Israeli leaders. We remember very well how Ariel Sharon entered the mosque in 2000, practically provoking a whole intifada, a whole uprising, which led to very serious actions, including reoccupation of all Palestinian towns and cities and massacres in many places. I don't think they have this wisdom, and I think what they are doing today by closing the mosque and by trying to impose these metal detectors and changing many new things, what they are trying to do is to test the Arab world and the Muslim world. They want to test what would be the reaction, and if the reaction is not strong enough, they would probably proceed with more very serious measures. I remember in 96, you mentioned 96, at that time the same prime minister was there, Netanyahu, and he used tanks and helicopters against us. I was, as a medical doctor in my white coat, treating an injured person when a sniper shot me twice with high-velocity bullets. I still carry these shrapnels. So this man is not the most wise leader in the world. And I am sure if he feels that the Arab world and the Islamic world is not responding by punitive actions against Israel, if punishment is not taken against Israel, if sanctions are not used against Israel, they will proceed with more violations, and they will completely undermine the stability not only of the area here, but the stability in the whole region. It's a very dangerous policy. It's a very dangerous government. It's a very extreme and racist government. And what they are doing should be encountered by sanctions and boycotts.
Okay, and Mustafa, you have been a steady voice on this, a loud voice, if you will. But honestly, Gideon mentioned this, and he's not wrong. The reaction from the Arab and Islamic community, it really hasn't been as robust, I think you would say, as you would expect. Mohammed, if I could put that question to you, how would you characterize the reaction from the Arab and Islamic community about this?
The reaction until now is true, has not been equal to one would expect. But it's only 2 days, and I think once the whole thing sinks in, people will react far more violently in the Arab and Muslim world. What is taking place is something very, very serious and dangerous. We don't want the conflict to spread into a religious conflict. But what the Israeli government is doing, and although you say they are sensitive to the issue, they don't seem to be sensitive at all. They ought to know that a place like the al-Aqsa Mosque is the third holiest place in Islam. And being such, people would react far more violently, I'm sure. And it's only early days, first day, second day, third day, and you don't know what will happen after that. And to be able to stop violence regarding a religious issue like this will not be easy once it erupts all over the area. Into the whole region will erupt into violence.
Okay, Gideon, do you, Mohammed, Gideon, do you agree with that assessment? Do you really, can you see this continuing to escalate over the coming days and weeks? Or is there an opening, is there a moment to turn this back, even a little?
I don't think so. I think that the Arab world right now is preoccupied with other issues. I see it throughout the whole maintenance of the occupation, as to be said. The Arab world became very passive and quite lost interest. And I say it with a lot of sorrow, I must say. The Arab world and the Islamic world quite lost interest in the struggle against the occupation. And there are new actors and new interests playing there. And the Arab world is much more preoccupied with Iran and with domestic questions rather than with this. They will, as usual, pay their lip services, which they always do. But I don't see it getting into a real explosion if nothing will happen in the coming days. If it will remain as it is now, I don't think, and hopefully I'm right, I don't think that this will lead to an international explosive event. I think it will be very soon forgotten if nothing will happen in the coming days.
Okay. Mustafa, what role does Jordan have in this as custodians of this site? What would you like to see from them? What can they really do?
Well, first of all, let me say about the whole Arab and Muslim world, I do agree that maybe our expectations are not very high. But I must say that the embarrassment is very high to all the Arab and Islamic regimes today. It's a very serious embarrassment. And I am sure this will affect many of the Israeli plans for normalization. I think this will become much more difficult in the coming days and months, probably because of the Israeli behavior. But that doesn't mean there is no reaction. On the contrary, I think the Palestinian issue is becoming more and more of a human issue of the whole world. And that's why we see the rise of the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, the BDS movement, which even some Jewish activists are joining. In a way, as Nelson Mandela said once, the Palestinian issue is becoming the most important moral issue of the world. And that is very encouraging, of course, to us. On the issue of Jordan, I think Jordan has big responsibility as a custodian of the Islamic sites. Israel's imposition of things like detectors and new regiments and even closing the mosque are by themselves a very serious violation of the custodian agreements and of the Jordanian responsibilities. That's why I know that the Jordanians have been communicating with the Israelis, but I think the Israeli behavior has created very big anger in Jordan itself. And one should not underestimate in any way the effect on the public, not only in Jordan, but also in the Arab and Islamic world in general. The embarrassment is very high.
And that will be the last word. Gentlemen, thank you very much for the discussion. Appreciate it. Thank you to Gideon Levy, Mustafa Brigadi, and Mohammed Nusseibeh. And thank you for joining us. You can see the program again anytime if you visit our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Rochelle Carey, and the entire team. Bye for now.